The following program contains disturbing content that may be in settings and situations similar to your own. Discretion is advised. America's heartland, flyover country, shaking dice at the cafe for morning coffee, crop prices and rainfall, a day's work for a day's pay, business conducted on a handshake, where a man is as good as his word, church socials, and town team baseball. But as the sun sets on this piece of Americana, there is no immunity from the darkness. There are things dare not spoken, and thoughts recessed in the corner of a man's mind, masked by the roar of a summer thunderstorm, hidden in the silence of winter snow, yet peering from the darkness in the shadows of the Midwest. Whatever you're thinking about, stop for a moment. You've just received a phone call. They're telling you that no one can locate your child, or maybe your spouse, or a brother or sister, a parent. Don't panic. There's a logical explanation. Where have they not looked? Whose house wasn't checked? The day grows later, and the police and community members are out looking. And just in case, they issued a press release. Are they lost and maybe hurt during some sort of misadventure? Night arrives. Are they hungry, cold? Are they with a stranger? They must know we're out looking for them. A night turns into a week, then a month. The news cycle moves on when, fortunate, there may be a mention of your loved one. The search parties are reduced to a single investigator who is working with their own caseload. And now it's a year later. The story is now a single paragraph on an 8x10 flyer, which will soon be filed into an internet clearinghouse. You've had to push forward. Life goes forward without your approval. But still, every night, your stomach turns as your head runs through scenarios and regrets. You're listening to Shadows of the Midwest, Secrets of County Ditch Number 5, Episode 7, Someone's Daughter. During a night out, longtime Blue Earth resident Deb Anderson's life would change. The story of a Jane Doe buried in Riverside Cemetery over 20 years prior. It's a story that Deb had never heard. Why not? It's a story that would occupy the next 14 years of her life. And for the first time, you will hear Deb's whole story in her words.
I'm Deb Anderson. I live in Blue Earth, Minnesota, and I've lived there for 30 plus years. And I became interested in a Jane Doe case like 2001 or 2002, roughly. Kind of accidentally. We had a friend of ours that was a police officer, and we were sitting in a bar one night, and he came in making his rounds. And I was teasing him, and I asked him, what's going on? You got any cold cases? What's it? Because it's a small town, and it's kind of a joke. And I always said that to him. And he goes, all right, you want to hear one? There's an unidentified woman buried out in the cemetery. She was found in the ditch on May 30th, 1980, and they never did identify her. And I said, you got to be kidding me. He's like, no. And he drew on a bar napkin a little map of the cemetery and where she was. And that's how it started. Well, I was just curious because I couldn't believe I'd never heard about it. Just because, it's a small town. Everybody just kind of, and just stuff like that gets shared. And so I thought, well, I'm going to look it up online. There must be something about it, about this unidentified woman, because obviously somebody's looking for their child. I was very naive about the numbers pertaining to missing and unidentified people. I was very naive about the way that society views that, and oftentimes families that aren't connected and stuff, and people just don't have anybody to look for them. But anyway, so I looked online and I couldn't find anything, and I thought, well, that's not good. If you can't find anything, what if her parents or siblings or somebody's still looking for her? They're not going to find anything. They're not going to find her. And so I called the Faribault County Sheriff's Department, and I said, hey, you have a Jane Doe or an unidentified female case from 1980, and I was just wondering if I could get any more information on it, or where it was on the internet or something, whatever. And the first time I called, I don't remember who answered, but whoever answered said, no, we don't. And I said, yes, you do. I'm pretty sure. Okay. And they're like, you called the wrong agency, whatever. So I immediately drove out to the cemetery where this our friend of ours had drawn this map. And sure enough, there's the stone, and it says right where she's found, and it's in Faribault County. The stone is perfectly clear. There's no question about it. So I call them back, and they're like, yeah, we don't have one. And I said, yes, you do. I've seen it. And this went on for a couple of weeks at least. That they kept telling me I called the wrong agency, and that they didn't have a case and whatever. Well, the ones that were answering the phone and stuff were not employed there when it happened. So eventually somebody, and I think it was his last name was Bolster maybe or something, called me back, and in fact his name was Bolster, Dick Bolster, I think was his name. Called me back, and I said, I asked him some questions, and then I had started kind of like looking up the statute in Minnesota. The statute in Minnesota to see what is there any like requirements for the agency to report their unidentified, to a higher authority, or put it on a website, or just what happens? Do we really just bury him, put a stone on there, and forget? And so I had found out that there was such a thing as a missing person and unidentified body clearinghouse for the state of Minnesota website, and it was managed by the BCA, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. So I called the sheriff's department and I said, well, you need to get that on there. Like, there's a form and everything to fill out. And they were like, yeah. So I waited a while. I would check to see if it was out there, and nothing. So then this went back and forth. I don't remember where, but then I contacted the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and said, why isn't she listed, and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, the Faribault County Sheriff's Department has to submit that information to us, but we don't have it offhand, which neither here nor there. But anyway, so I called the Sheriff's Department again. I said, you got to get her list, whatever. Well, and they wouldn't do it. They just wouldn't do anything. So I got the form myself, and I don't know, it was like 2 pages or something with all the details that I had learned up to that point. And I filled it out, and I couldn't send it in as a citizen, private citizen, because it had to have like law enforcement okay that it was they don't want people just making stuff up. So I did that, and then I took it up to the sheriff's department to get it signed. It seems to me like I took it up there to get them to sign it, and then I was going to mail it, but and they said, no, we'll take care of it. Well, then another month went by, and still nothing, so I did it again, and that time I got their signatures, or whatever it was they needed, and I mailed it myself to the BCA, and they finally got her put on their website. During that time, I was researching and looking up possible matches and finding out everything I could about unidentified people and children.
So you actually had to be the one to mail it into the BCA and submit it, essentially?
And now I want to make sure that I'm very clear about the people. I'm going to say men because it just happened to be men. The men that worked that case in 1980, they did everything they could. You know, the website, the internet didn't exist back then. By the time any of that stuff had come into play, all those guys had retired or died. So I'm not faulting the original case, the detectives and investigators and sheriff's, folks that were on the original job. I do think that there was some negligence over the years in keeping up with what their responsibilities were, but it wasn't those same people. Faribault County considered it a closed case because he went to prison. The criminal was apprehended, and an unidentified or Jane Doe or John Doe, they don't have anybody to stand up for them. You know, in 87 or whenever it was, 88, when they finally got his confession and whatnot, nobody was there going, well, now help me find my daughter, because she didn't have a name. So there was nobody on her side.
Yeah, there was no incentive or pressure to actually pursue it. And unfortunately, my dealings with the BCA is that's kind of how they work as well. When some of these missing persons things I've worked with, I called them for some information, and legally it should be disseminated because it met all the criteria. They refused to, but I asked the agent in charge, I'm going, so are you actively working this case? Well, he said, the case is basically sitting on a shelf and they're waiting for something to come to them.
Yep.
And that's, he said, well, we've had things pop up, after 20 years, and it's like nobody's working it. It's sitting on a shelf in dormancy.
And the other thing that I would like to make clear or bring to the forefront, I guess, that people don't realize too. Now, things are a lot better today, even since when I started this cause, but they don't realize, this was Blue Earth, Minnesota. I don't even know what our population is, 3,000. They don't have a morgue somewhere where it was 10 cases that they have to work. They had one in 30 years, so I understand that pressing matters of crime and child abuse and neglect and all that definitely take precedence that happens like right now or at that. But again, this should have stayed on their radar because they're not overspent in this particular category. There was only one. How hard would it be to just send the paperwork in? You know what I mean? Like, okay, so if we're in downtown New York City or whatever, I'm sure that they're just overrun with unidentified people that they find alive and dead and whatnot. And I mean, that you still have an expectation that they're working at the best they can. But in their defense, they probably are extremely overloaded with little to no funding and whatnot. But Blue Earth, that's not the scenario. Or I should say Faribault County. And one of them, and I won't name names, but he no longer works there. He's retired. He might even be deceased now, I'm not sure. But one of them said to me on the phone in the very, very beginning, flat out said, and I'm going to call this a quote, but mind you, it's been several years, many years, so I don't get it quite right. But, quote, we figured she was a hitchhiker. She had callous feet. So she was probably a hippie hitchhiker, so we didn't really worry about it. And that to me, that's where the naive comes in. I was dumbfounded by that statement. Like, whether it's Indian or just hippie or whatever, like, it's still a human being. They're not disposable. but that's not the viewpoint that everybody holds.
So over those the next 14 years, what were some of the things that you had done, or that what are some of the steps you tried doing over that time?
Well, the first thing I did was I created a website that, and it still exists, but it doesn't come up on these searches. I can send you a link to it. I created a website, and I took her skull X-rays. I managed to get copies of her stuff. It took me forever to get anything done because nobody wanted to talk to me and said I didn't have any business dealing. Just leave it to the top, go home, sit out. But I did get copies of her skull X-rays, and I took them to, or sent them to, a police officer who sidelined as a reconstructive, skull reconstruction drawing, not the fancy. They weren't doing some of the stuff they're doing now in 2001 or whatever. But so he took the skull X-rays, and with whatever training or knowledge he had, he drew a best guess facial reconstruction. And although I don't, sometimes they get them right, sometimes they don't. It's neither here nor there, but it does bring it to a more human level where people take interest. So even if I didn't really care. I mean, I cared. I wanted it to look like her as much as it could, but we knew it was all just a guess. But it gives the topic, the whole subject, her entity, a visual for people, and that creates interest, more so than not having one. So I put that on the website, and I made hundreds and hundreds of flyers in both English and Spanish. And every time we would take a vacation, my mom and my daughter and I used to drive on week-long vacations. So just my daughter was little. And we would go down to Nashville or out to, the Black Hills or whatever. And when we would do that, I would tape these posters on wherever we stopped. I'd tape them up on a rest area door or a business window that would let me put it up there, and just anything I came across, I kept them in my purse, and I would just tack one up. And then for a while, I made these T-shirts, and I gave them away free on her website. People are always Googling for free stuff, you'd be surprised. Of course, people did, and so I would send them a T-shirt. They weren't the greatest thing in the world, but they were, have you seen me? And it had the drawing and contact information. And then I would go through all the missing person pages and databases and lists and try to find ones that were possible matches. And I would post them on her webpage under possible matches. I don't know how many there's out there, but I've removed quite a few since the beginning. They got found. I met some very interesting people, families. Sometimes, one time, a family that we were just sure that it was a possible match. They were from several hours away. I can't believe, a full day's drive away. And they drove here because we couldn't get our law enforcement or their law enforcement interested in doing anything about it. The possibility that it was a match. And they went out to the cemetery and stuff, and we had lunch, and I met so many, and that was the first time, I guess, that it really hit me. These people came, and their daughter, Paulette Susan Jasper, she's since been found and identified. These people came all this way, and we sat at a table in a restaurant, fringes of society or whatever. You know, this can happen to absolutely anyone. Their child suffered from mental illness. She ran away because of it and fell into bad situations and, you know, all kinds of things. But it was not because of anything other than mental illness, you know. At the time when I started, I didn't have a child. I wasn't even pregnant. And I just still thought that somebody's child, this has to be, you know, this is not okay. We have to put this information out there in case someone's looking. And I had wanted to do DNA right away, but they wouldn't. That's a whole other story that could take 3 hours. But anyway, and then shortly after I started, I found out I was pregnant, and I had a daughter, and she grew up with this in her life just because. I mean, I didn't share the horrible atrocities that became Michelle, but she knew, and I decided that it was important that she know that people are not disposable, even if they make bad choices here or there or whatever. They're still someone's child, their sister, mother, and you know, whatever. And if we care about our families and friends, and you know, and we bother to bury any of them and have these ceremonies and funerals, and you know, then we do it for all of them. There's no difference. We're all human.
How did your family, your husband and your daughter, handle this over those 14 years?
Oh, my daughter was, because she knew it from the moment she had understanding of anything. It was kind of around her at home as my hobby or whatever. And I would get phone calls, and of course she'd hear them, you know, or I would get emails or letters in the mail or whatever. People would come and visit, like that family, you know, she was there, met them. So she was very aware of it, but she was kind of just like, whatever, because it was funny. One of her friends came over to spend the night one night. They were like, I don't know, 10 or 11 or something. And her friend walked in, and she goes, "Oh, is there anything on the case on the unidentified woman? Have you gotten any?" You know, asking me questions. And my Maddie rolled her eyes and just walked upstairs. And she was like, "Oh, it wasn't a big deal to her." I mean, it was a thing, but it just was day to day. But my husband put up with a lot because it was not a popular thing in our town that I did. It was, it brought a lot of attention, negative attention to us that was not fun, to say the least. And I was over the top with it in a lot of situations. I just couldn't let it go for reasons I'll never understand. And I remember one time we were going out to supper with some friends. We were in the car driving to meet them at a restaurant. And my husband's pretty quiet. He never does much. That's just his nature, you know. But he says, "You know, could you do me a favor?" And I said, "What's that?" And he goes, "So for tonight, just tonight, could you not talk about Jane Doe during supper? Could we just have a meal without that tonight?" And then I knew, I was like, wow, I must really not. But, you know, every day there'd be things to share that I wanted somebody, because they were so usually things to share that because they were so like, you've got to be kidding me. That's not how that goes, or that's not what happened. Yes, it is. If you don't want to believe it, here's the proof. You know, and I couldn't let it go. I don't know why, but I can't, you know, there wasn't a day that didn't go by where I didn't go like, oh, I should write a letter to so-and-so, or I should look up this and find that. Wonder if they did this, or do they have fingerprints, and you know, all. That was the other thing I did, was I got a copy of her fingerprints, and I found a friendly law enforcement officer in a whole other county, several hours from here, that he would submit it to get it run through APHIS, which another Jane Doe in about like 2 or 3 counties over from where we live, like 2 or 3 hours away. And he had a funeral for her. When he identified her, he and his team identified her. It was another small town, found in a ditch, same exact storyline. And so my mom and my daughter and I drove over to the funeral they held for her, which is how I met him and which is what started the conversation, and one thing led to another. I fought tooth and nail. I wrote letters to politicians and governor and any, national missing anybody that I could think of that might help. And one of the old, and nobody could help, or they just said, you need to take it up with your sheriff's department, whatever. And then I said, so then I was like, I want to file a complaint against the sheriff's department. And it turns out that at least in the state of Minnesota, county sheriffs do not report to anyone except for the voting public. So if you want an investigation done, unless things have changed in the last 5 years, there is a third-party agency that you submit your complaint to, and then they literally send it back to that department, that sheriff's department, and the sheriff's department investigates their own behavior. And I'm not making it up. And nobody believes me when I say that. I have a letter from the state, is it Attorney General? I don't remember. Anyway, a legitimate government official who states that point blank in the letter he sent to me as a response to when I asked for help. And the statute, you can look it up. It flat out says so the only thing you can do is to try to vote the sheriff out of office. One of the deputies that had been present when her body was found, his name was Jerry Cave. He's now passed away, but he was still alive when I started this. He firmly believed that she was this missing girl from New York her name was Jacqueline Lerman. And he had reasons. He firmly believed it, and I know now, or I not know now, but I look back on it now, and I see, it was his way of dealing with it. Like, they couldn't solve it, so in his mind, there were legitimate reasons to think it was her, but things had been done that he had kind of forgotten that proved it wasn't her, arguably, but he still felt like it was her, and I said, okay, let's start there then. Let me find any information I could about her. Well, I couldn't find anything. No missing person report, nothing. So I knew her last name was Lerman. So I just printed out all the Lerman's phone numbers in the area where she was supposed to be from. And there was thousands. I don't know how many there were. And I just started calling them on my way to work and on my way home and on Sundays. I just went down the list. And I would say, hi, my name's Deb Anderson. I'm in Blue Minnesota. I'm just doing some genealogy and some research. And I'm just trying to track down a family member or somebody that, related to a Jacqueline Lerman and blah, blah, blah. And I could talk for the next 10 hours of the story some people told me, and some people just hung up on me, and some people told me to get screwed, and some people talked to me for an hour. And finally, one Sunday afternoon, I was doing it, and I called this one number, and the woman said, no, I don't have nobody like that. No, whatever. I'm like, okay, thank you very much, hung up. And then about 45 minutes later, my phone rang, and I answered it, and here it was this woman again. And she goes, is this the woman that called me about you? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, you don't mean Jackie? And she had some other last name. And I said, I don't know that last name, but here's the other things that I do know. She was approximately this old, or what, all the things that were in the file for Jacqueline Lerman. And then the woman said, well, she was my stepsister, and I'm not searching or trying to resolve whatever, but my brother is, so I'll give him your information and have him call you. And I was like, okay. And about an hour later, her brother called me, and her brother's name is Philip Lerman. And he says, hi, I'm Philip Lerman, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, great. Let's compare notes, whatever, you know. And he said, well, before we start, I want to tell you something. And I said, what's that? And he goes, I am the executive producer of America's Most Wanted. And I said, yeah, you are. And I was kind of disgusted. I thought, you know what? This isn't a joke. I don't need people messing with me. I got enough problems, you know. I just really thought somebody was having a fun day at my expense. And he proceeded to give me some information, and he said, you can validate it all, that it's true, and blah, 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 and whatever. And sure enough, I did, and lo and behold, he really was who he said he was. And he unofficially, you know, he had obviously contacts because of the job he was in. And he got the Faribault County Sheriff's Office to finally submit some DNA to the FBI DNA laboratory, BCA, and all that. Long story short, after the fact, we find out that he didn't submit Jane Doe's DNA. We don't know if they clipped their own pubic hairs or what, but it was a man's DNA that they submitted. It was all fake because they had lost the samples and didn't want anybody to know, whatever. That fiasco drug on and on, but it made, I think it made Faribault County realize that I wasn't going away and that there were other people in the world that were starting to give a crap, you know. And so then every once in a while, back to that listing her on the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's website, every once in a while, once she got listed, I would go out and check to make sure it was still listed for, I don't know why, because I'm crazy and I'm obsessive compulsive or whatever. And one time I went out there and it was gone. They had revamped the site and she wasn't on there again. So I called them up and I'm like, what the hell? Because by this point, this has gone on for 12 years, 13 years, and I'm just sick of everybody's excuses. And, we're going to get there, we were just redoing the site, we haven't got it up yet. Yeah, whatever, get it up, get it fixed, fine. Well, nothing happened for a couple of weeks or two. I think I waited a week, and then I called it back, and this woman answered the phone. And I still remember her name, but we'll just leave it. She says, is this, I don't even know, I didn't say my name. I just said, hey, there used to be this Jane Doe on your, because sometimes I didn't want them to know it was me right out of the chute because they would write me off. But if they just thought it was a random question, they'd be more helpful. And she says, is this Deb Anderson? And I said, in my head, I said, shit, yeah, why? Yeah, it is. And she said, oh, I have your name written on the outside of her file. And I said, oh, okay, well, here's the deal. It was on the website, it fell off. What's the problem? How can we prevent this from continuing to happen? And she promised that she'd put it back on the whatever. I don't remember all the details, but then she said, I just want you to know we really want to exhume, there are cases that we're trying to actively pursue whenever we just don't have the money. And I said, you don't need any money. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, I have a letter from the guy who buried her, who still runs the excavating business, signed from him. He is my friend. He said he will dig her up for free. I've been telling law enforcement that for the last 7 years, And she went, you're kidding. And I'm like, no. And that's all it took. Within a month, the sheriff's department contacted me and said, would you like to meet us? Because we're going to, go over the plan for the exhumation. I'm like, she's being exhumed? You gotta be fucking kidding me. I mean, like, I couldn't even, I just couldn't even make sense of it because it had been so long and so fought by so many people. But this Chris that I had spoken to took me at my word and talked to the sheriff's department and said she wanted it done, and they said okay because apparently she outranked him, and it was done. And within minutes of them doing the DNA test, she was identified. Michelle Yvette Boucher. Correct, from Bay City, Texas. The sister I never had, I guess. It's traumatic. I mean, you feel like you've succeeded, and like you don't feel good. You know, when you do find the family, but I mean, it's still a loss. It brings all those ugly memories, you know, and they learn the things that they didn't know, and it takes away hope, and it's just really something I didn't even realize until it happened. I just never thought about it's a double-edged sword, that's all. Gary Sunken, he was a local drainage excavator business, and he just does the cemetery stuff, and he still does to this day. But he buried her. He said he would dig her up for free. He buried her, and he would dig her up because he always felt like it should have been pursued. And in the end, we finally got permission, and he did dig her up for free. He got to meet her father and her sister. They stood in my living room, and I get choked up thinking about it every time. Because they were kind of similar men, similar ages, and they hugged in my living room and cried, both of them. And let me tell you, these two guys were not the type you would picture hugging and crying and, you know, having a moment. But they did. It was beautiful.
You've been listening to Shadows of the Midwest, research produced and hosted by Joe Kistner, a production of Just Past Nowhere Productions, LLC, 2024. Music provided by Matt Hutchinson and the Hutchinson Effect. Remember to like and subscribe and leave a kind review wherever you're listening to your podcasts. And feel free to reach out through our Facebook page, or you can write shadowsofthemidwest@gmail.com.